GPB, winner of 11 Emmy Awards, including Station Excellence. Thank you for your support.
The 2012 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. The general election debate for Public Service Commission District 3.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis O'Hare, host of All Things Considered on 90.1 WABE. We'd like to welcome our viewers and our studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the debate between the candidates in the race for Georgia's Public Service Commission District 3. Now, the Public Service Commission oversees telecommunications, electric, and gas services in the state. The 3rd District of the Public Service Commission covers Metro Atlanta, including Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, and Rockdale counties. Now, although the commissioner must reside in that district, this is a statewide election. Now, let's meet the candidates, and they are in alphabetical order. Chuck Eaton. He has served on the Public Service Commission for 6 years, becoming chairman in 2008. He also studies law in his free time. Stephen Oppenheimer is a former small business owner and a longtime community activist specializing in energy security and energy independence issues. And Brad Ploeger is a founder and co-owner of Arcturus Incorporated, a firm specializing in helping businesses develop their information technology infrastructure. Now, here's the format for the debate. In the first round, the candidates will answer a question from one of our 3 panelists. In the second round, the candidates will ask a question of an opponent of his choice. And then in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, the candidates have 30 seconds to make closing statements. Now, before we get started, let's meet our 3 panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Jean Bonner, an Atlanta-based radio reporter and producer for Georgia Public Broadcasting. Next, Crystal Edmondson. She is the broadcast editor of the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And our final panelist is Christy Swartz, business reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, let's get started with the debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. They have 60 seconds to answer the question, and as moderator, I will decide if a rebuttal is called for. By random selection, Brad Ploeger gets the first question from Jean Bonner.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ploeger. Thank you, candidates, for coming. Obviously, the PSC deals with some technical issues, with some complex matters. What in your background makes you interested in serving on the PSC, and what makes you qualified?
Well, thank you, Jean. On the Public Service Commission, we deal with complex issues with utility matters. I'm a small business owner. I solve problems for a living. I help businesses resolve complicated issues, and that's what we need with our Public Service Commissioner, someone that can look at a very complex system and come up with the best answers for all Georgians, and not necessarily having what they have in mind before they do these decisions, but going with an open mind and think everything on the table and what is best for all of us, all of our neighbors and our families. And that is what I believe a Public Service Commissioner must do, and that is why I believe I am qualified.
Crystal Edmondson, it's your turn to ask Stephen Oppenheimer a question.
I'd actually like to follow up on that question and ask the same question to you, Mr. Oppenheimer, as well. What specifically in your education and background makes you qualified for this position?
Well, I want to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for doing this, and the audience that's here live and watching on TV. Appreciate that. I was a small businessman, and I practiced dentistry for more than 20 years. I have a background in science, and I have worked on energy nationally and locally in a bipartisan fashion for 8 years. I'm running because the incumbent isn't looking out for homeowners and small business owners. For 30 years, I've served in numerous leadership positions and have been able to achieve consensus and finish projects on time. And I hear that as I've traveled the state, there's loss in trust in the Public Service Commission around the state, and I offer the new leadership that people seek.
And our final question in this round is Christy Swartz's question for Chuck Eaton.
I've got one that's kind of related to that. So, Commissioner, you know, there are a lot of different businesses, largely on the communication side, that actually the PSC doesn't regulate. And I'm talking about cable and broadband and things like that. So, you know, when we talk about the PSC, a lot of times people ask, you know, I don't understand what the PSC does. I don't understand what it means to me and whatever. And, you know, clearly there's been some attempts to try to kind of, you know, raise the profile of it. So when someone comes to you and says, I don't know what the PSC does, what does it mean to me, then as a standing commissioner, what do you tell them?
Well, our job is, one, to first fight for the consumers of the state of Georgia, and to ensure on the electric side that we have safe, reliable, and competitively priced energy, which is what we've done here in Georgia. Our electric rates are some of the lowest in the nation, and we're very competitive here in the Southeast. And so we make these difficult decisions as far as, you know, whether to implement, say, coal or whether to implement nuclear, and make sure that there's enough capacity out there, because there's not always, there aren't any easy decisions when it comes to this. The states that don't have the fortitude to invest in this capacity, they're the ones that are having brownouts and blackouts now. And you touched on telecom. We also do a lot with telecom, and we have to regulate those rates as well. So, you know, my job is just to get out there and ensure that Georgians have the most competitive rates possible.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. That concludes round one. It's now time for our candidates to ask questions of each other. You have 30 seconds for the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. And by random selection, Stephen Oppenheimer asks the first question.
My question is for Mr. Eaton. I'm concerned about skyrocketing electricity rates and nuclear plants that certainly are going to add to those rates. But a recent report by the Energy Information Administration showed that Georgia has the highest residential rates in the United States, continental United States. And I want to know if Georgians paying double the national average for residential gas is being neglectful of your responsibilities, or does it have something to do with taking $100 dinners with natural gas lobbyists?
I would say that's absolutely false. I've never heard that statistic at all. There are states like California, New Jersey that pay close to 50% more than we do, and our residential rates are well below the national average and very competitive in the Southeast. The skyrocketing energy rates across the country are a huge concern of mine. Unfortunately, the Obama administration and the EPA and people like the politicians that my opponent, Mr. Oppenheimer, supports, Nancy Pelosi, given her financial contributions, these are the people that are raising our rates across the country. I've tried to battle that as hard as I can here in Georgia. We were the first state to invest in nuclear power in 30 years. And so we are doing things to try to provide energy independence, but unfortunately we have a federal government that's not cooperating, and hopefully come this November I'll be able to work with Mitt Romney on a better energy plan, not only for Georgia, but for this country.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Now it's time for Brad Ploeger to ask a question of the opponent of his choice. Mr. Ploeger.
I'm going to ask my question of Commissioner Eaton. Commissioner Eaton, Georgia continues to suffer from record high unemployment. How do you justify your opposition to having no rate sharing, risk sharing plan for ratepayers and investors currently with the building of Vogtle?
Well, there's this risk sharing plan that's been put out there by a few groups, but there's no state in the country that does any kind of plan. That's what's been put out there by the media. We already have a high level of scrutiny when it comes to approving our nuclear power plans. We have the IRP process, and this risk-sharing mechanism actually would water down a much tougher statute that doesn't risk share at all. What it does is, if the power company puts something in place that was built in prudently, it puts 100% of that cost onto their shareholders, whereas the risk-sharing mechanism merely waters down a much tougher statute, and that's why I was opposed to it. I thought it was kind of a gimmick. We're providing a very high level of scrutiny on the nuclear power plants. We have a full-time consultant there right now. We have hearings 6 times a year on it, And we're not going to let any imprudent cost. I'm certainly not going to vote for a single imprudent cost at the Public Service Commission.
Need to make one note here. Mr. Ploeger, you have 30 seconds to rebut. And Mr. Oppenheimer, I forgot to give you 30 seconds for rebuttal to your question to Mr. Eaton. So when Mr. Ploeger finishes his, we'll give you 30 seconds also. Mr. Ploeger.
Well, Commissioner Eaton, we're still talking about experimental nuclear reactors that have never been built in the United States. Right now, all the risk is on the ratepayers. The investors are guaranteed to make a profit. I don't think that's the best thing for the ratepayers in Georgia. And I hope you reconsider your opposition to risk sharing.
Mr. Oppenheimer, you have the 30 seconds I forgot to give you a few minutes ago.
Okay. Well, Mr. Eaton, rates are increasing because you voted 10 times to pass on every rate increases to Georgia's consumers. And we are now using more natural gas than we are coal, and that's helping to reduce the cost of electricity. So it's not because of the EPA, and these regulations are due to actually come from the Bush era and not the Obama era.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Eaton, you get to ask one of your opponents a question.
Sure. Mr. Ploeger, when was the last Public Service Commission meeting you've attended, and what did you think of it?
Well, sir, the last commission meeting I attended, I tried to read online, and those records are impossible to get. You have to file Freedom of Information Act requests to see the decisions being made by our commission. I run my own business. I don't have time right now to go to every meeting of the commission. And what we see is it's tough to get the records, and Georgians don't have the transparency they need on this commission. We don't know the information you're debating. It's like pulling teeth to find out what the commission is up to.
Mr. Eaton, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
I don't know what my opponent's talking about. The Public Service Commission is one of the most transparent agencies out there. We're having 6 public hearings a year on Plant Vogel. Our meetings are broadcast over the internet. They're archived. There's an unprecedented amount of information that's coming out of this commission in this day and age.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. That concludes our second round of questioning, and if you're just joining our program in progress, this is the debate between the candidates in the general election for Georgia's Public Service Commission District 3. And for our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of the candidate of his or her choice, in this case her choice, since we have 3 women on the panel. The candidates will be allowed 60 seconds to respond. We begin this round with a question from Jean Bonner.
Thank you. Mr. Eaton, you said your job as commissioner is to fight for consumers. I'm sure you're aware that there's a high level of distrust among voters for candidates of all parties, for government in general. And I think also there's a certain sense that the PSC, a perception that the PSC is a little too cozy with the utilities it's meant to oversee. Can you give specific instances where you've fought for consumers, and what can you say to dispel the notion that government can't be trusted or that the PSC is too close with Georgia Power?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I've never granted Georgia Power any of the rate increases they've requested. We've always lowered whatever their requests were. So we've fought with the power company on numerous occasions on that. As far as transparency and openness, I was the deciding vote when I first got on the commission for our ex parte rule. Before that rule was put into place, lobbyists could meet with commissioners literally a minute before the vote was supposed to take place, and I hammered it out. It was long overdue, and I hammered out a compromise and made it to where there was a cooling off period to where commissioners wouldn't be meeting with lobbyists behind closed doors, and to ensure that we could sit and gather our thoughts and talk with our advisory staff and do the best thing that we can do for Georgia as far as maintaining low rate and the proper capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. The next question comes from Crystal Edmondson.
In this economy, job creation obviously is a hot topic. What role can the PSC play to attract and retain jobs through energy policies to the state?
To whom is this question being asked?
This question is for Mr. Ploeger.
Mr. Ploeger.
Well, one of the main things the PSC can do to increase jobs in Georgia is look at our power grid. Look at how it's utilized. We can modernize it. Those are jobs all over Georgia and not just at one location where we're building nuclear units. We can look at how we can find more efficiencies, installing the systems we need to make Georgia ready for the 21st century and beyond. But also, we have to keep a fair environment. We need to ensure that, homeowners can afford their utility bills. We must keep downward pressure on rates. So therefore, we know what we can plan for ourselves and also be able to invest so you can start a business like mine, so you can continue to grow jobs in this state.
Our next question comes from Christy Swartz.
Hi, this is for Mr. Oppenheimer. I was going through your website today and the different statements at the bottom under I pledge. There was a third statement that referred to that you wanted to keep producing power in Georgia, which utilities largely do, with some exceptions, those being purchase power agreements. It's kind of up for debate how much renewables can actually be produced in Georgia, and specifically when that comes actually to wind energy. Now, utilities have, again, options to purchase that power out of state. In fact, Georgia Power's sister company, Alabama, does that. Would you be okay with these utilities purchasing renewables from outside of state, or are you just going to kind of keep your stance on producing all power in Georgia?
When Georgia is 8th in unemployment, I'm going to look to see that those expenditures by Georgians help Georgians. And we have the potential here to be doing more solar energy, and I'm glad that the incumbent has come around in the last 6 weeks to see that and changed his stance. And as well, we could be doing more from biomass, which again in 2006 he talked about the potential for that, and that really has been flatlined since 2006. So, and then as well, within the planning process, there's the opportunity to emphasize energy efficiency. And right now, Georgia is in a 4-way tie for 43rd place of states in energy efficiency. And energy efficiency can create a lot of jobs and manufacturing jobs in Georgia. So I'm going to stick to the jobs being in Georgia.
Mr. Eaton, since Mr. Oppenheimer said you had changed your position, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
It's not at all a position change. I voted for 50 megawatts of solar last year before I even knew anything about Steve Oppenheimer. The fact is I'm going to do what's right for the Georgia consumer. And if solar, fits into that and it isn't going to increase rates, then I'll fit into it. Unlike my opponent who criticized me for not doing it 4 years ago, when it was 3 times higher, I'm willing to look at it today when it's become more competitive.
Gene Bonner has the next question.
Mr. Eaton, before, when you were answering one of the questions, you blamed the federal government for skyrocketing energy rates. But can you tell me, what does the Obama administration have to do with potential cost overruns at Plant Vogtle, or approving Georgia Power to charge ratepayers for the Plant Vogtle financing long before it even generates power?
Well, there haven't been any overruns at Plant Vogtle yet. As a matter of fact, all that we've done is approve a underrun. We've actually decreased the budget on that project. There have been some subs that have run over, and they're in litigation right now with Georgia Power, maintains at zero. But what does it have to do with it? I mean, the last rate case we had, 50% of it was environmental costs. I mean, these costs have to be paid for somehow. And right now we have an EPA that's acting unilaterally, and the hundreds of millions of dollars of compliance costs. And this isn't going on just in Georgia. This is going on across the country. And it's just getting more and more expensive to deal with these compliance costs, and I feel like it ought to be accomplished legislatively. It shouldn't be done unilaterally. And but the Plant Vogtle project is actually running quite well right now. So,
Crystal Edmondson has the next question.
This is actually a question for all 3 candidates. The topic of transparency has come up a couple of times here. What would you do to reach out to the business community, which is important, but also to support the cause of consumers without the appearance of cozying up, if you will, with local businesses, with utilities? How would you move forward with making sure that your actions are transparent and at the highest level of ethics. If for the candidates, if you are elected again to a spot on the PSC, we'll begin with Commissioner Eaton.
All right, and Commissioner Eaton, all three of you, because our time is running short, 30 seconds for this one.
Well, I believe in transparency, and that's the way that we've behaved at the commission, and that's what I've fought for. I fought for it with the ex parte. We broadcast of all of our meetings. When we have rate hearings, many times we take them across the state. We go outside of Atlanta and try to hold hearings all around. We do them at different times of the day. We'll try to do them after work so folks can come in and voice their thoughts on it. So the commission, we strive to be an extremely open and transparent agency.
And we'll move right down the row to the man in the middle, Mr. Oppenheimer, next.
In July, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that our electric rates are up 24% in 5 years. In the 2008, the Consumer Utility Council, the professional advocate for the people, was removed. I want to see that we restore that position so the Georgia families and small businesses that can't afford their own lobbyists and lawyers will have representation and access to the Public Service Commission documents.
And finally, Mr. Ploeger, you have 30 seconds.
First, I believe money buys influence in this state. And as a Public Service Commissioner, I refuse to accept any money from anyone with an interest before the commission. That's what we have to expect. In addition, for transparency, I want to go to the General Assembly and see that the consumer advocates are reinstated and the budget is funded so the consumer, the little guy, has money behind him to fight when rates are being increased.
We have time for one more question, and this last one comes from Christy Swartz.
Okay. People often ask me a lot about nuclear waste, so this one's for all three of you. Again, there's a lot of debate about how to handle nuclear waste in the long term, and granted that may be up to the federal government, but I'd like to hear your all thoughts on how to handle that. And if you're comfortable with the way it's being done now, then what are you doing to kind of ease the fears of people that maybe live close to a nuclear plant and are concerned about it?
All right, gentlemen, once again, 30 seconds apiece because of time, and we'll go in reverse order. Mr. Ploeger first.
Nuclear waste is one of the costs of nuclear energy we are not fully accounting for. Georgia Power views it as it's going to be the federal government's problem. They must treat that waste. And I oppose nuclear power because we do not have a comprehensive plan for the waste products we produce. At Plant Hatch, we're storing it in dry casks outside the reactors with no long-term plan of how to deal with that. And we can't do that to our children and our families in this state.
Mr. Oppenheimer.
Nuclear waste is a real problem and a real challenge, so much so the federal government isn't licensing any more nuclear plants. This needs to be accounted into the real long-term costs of Plant Vogtle, what this is going to cost, because the costs will increase over time to store that, because there is no federal solution on the table at this point in time.
And finally, Commissioner Eaton.
There was supposed to be a solution, and that was Yucca Mountain. And the Georgia ratepayers are on the hook for $1 billion on Yucca Mountain, along with many other states. And it's been a huge letdown by the federal government and something that all Georgia consumers should be enraged by. I know that I am, and I've sent letters, and we've supported litigation. Much of the litigation here in Georgia, we've won, and we've made some great strides in getting Yucca Mountain back online. Folks say as long as Harry Reid is in the Senate, we won't have Yucca Mountain. I don't see why that should matter.
That's all the time we have for questions. Each candidate for Georgia's Public Service Commission District 3 will now have 30 seconds for closing statements, and Stephen Oppenheimer was randomly selected to give the first statement.
I'm Steve Oppenheimer, and I ask for your vote. Today, we've heard about skyrocketing utility rates, a nuclear plant guaranteed to raise our energy costs, and Georgia having the highest residential rates. I'm a retired dentist. I've always been serving my community and trying to make Georgia a better place to live and raise our families. Only new leadership with new ideas, free of conflict of interest, can bring change the course that we're on. I can win this election and put the public back in the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Oppenheimer. Our next closing statement comes from Chuck Eaton.
Thank you to the moderators, Georgia Public Broadcasting, and the people that took the time to watch this debate. I've been honored to serve as your Public Service Commissioner, and I ask for your vote once again. Ever since the day I took office, my highest priority has been looking out for you, and Georgia has some of the lowest rates in the country because of that. If reelected, I will continue to fight for low rates, and fight for more jobs, and fight for the future of Georgia. Thank you again. I'm Chuck Eaton, and I ask for your vote on the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Our final closing statement is from Brad Ploeger.
I'm Brad Ploeger, and I ask for your vote. I believe you should trust your Public Service Commissioner to look out for your best interest, not the best interest of the people who donate to them, but yours and your families. This state, we have so much to do. And with your vote, we can take it there. We can make Georgia a better place for all of us with lower rates and better opportunities for all Georgia families. I ask for your vote. I'm Brad Ploeger. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ploeger, and thanks to all three of you. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters the general election will be held Tuesday, November 6th. Thanks to our candidates, to our panel of journalists, and we'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. This broadcast has been streamed and will be available on demand at GPB's website. I'm Dennis O'Hare. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
This is a GPB original production.